Okay, our objective now is to take the list of movies that we've parsed from the API and actually show it on the screen. The way we'll do that is with something called a recycler view. So if you go into the assignments tab, scroll down, and then there should be a link to using this recycler view. And I want to spend a little bit of time giving some background on recycler view. So for modern Android apps, the recycler view is an Android component, which is the recommended way to display a scrolling list of elements from a large data set. The recycler view is the replacement for older components or older widgets called list view and grid view. And so it's relatively newer, at least compared to list view and grid view, and it essentially forces the developer to use these best practices that emerged from the Android ecosystem. The recycler view is more advanced and more flexible. However, the downside of this flexibility is that recycler view is also a bit more complicated. And so that's why we're going to step through how to use recycler view in this video, and hopefully it'll make a bit more sense by the end. So there are a couple different components to the recycler view that you can see in this guide here. The first is the layout manager, which basically dictates how the views are added to the screen, in which orientation, and how they're actually put in your activity, how they're actually displayed. The views that are actually contained inside the recycler view and inside the layout manager are actually being held by something called a view holder. And that's the unit at which the adapter operates. So the adapter, its job is to manage and create these view holders, which will be shown in the layout manager. So the adapter, you kind of think of it as the glue between the layout manager, which is actually what the user will see in their application, and the dataset, which is, in our case, it's a list of movies. So the adapter is what will bind the two things together. So this begs the question, why are we using a recycler view? Because there's kind of a lot going on. It's not really clear what the benefits are. The main benefit is that recycler view will guarantee that you have at least some level of efficiency when you're rendering this list of data. So one thing to keep in mind is that unlike your computer, your phone is typically not being charged, right? So you want to be aware of the resources that you're using on your phone as an application developer. You don't want to do something very wasteful, which will consume a lot of bandwidth and will drain the battery. And so recycler view will help you do that. It'll make you more efficient with resources, because one of the things that happens with Android is view inflation. The operation of taking a view, inflating it, and putting it onto the screen is pretty expensive. So the fewer times that you do that operation, the more efficient your application will be. And so the recycler view, using something called the view holder, which we talked about, which is what the adapter deals with, it will not inflate any more views than necessary to actually show them on the screen. So that's the real benefit that you get with the recycler view. And you didn't actually have these guarantees if you're using list view. So that's why recycler view is typically preferred. Okay, so there's a couple different steps to use the recycler view. And so if you scroll down a little bit, you have pretty much a step-by-step guide in this article. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these steps and paste them into our app. Okay, so the first step is add recycler view support library to the Gradle build file. So the recycler view by default doesn't come in your kind of vanilla Android projects. You need to add a dependency for it in your Gradle build file. Instead of actually adding it directly to the Gradle build file, I mean, that's what we'll end up doing. But one way to do that is actually go into your XML, if you go into your project, go into the res folder, which stands for resources, open up the layout, and open up the activity movie. And we can add the recycler view here. And this, if you click on this arrow here, it'll actually add the project dependency for you. Cool, so it just did that, and basically let me show you what it did. It added this line into my build.gradle file, which is located in the app module. So you can either do that manually, or you can do what I did and just download it directly from here. Okay, so one thing I want to do is, before we actually get started with modifying the view, I'm going to just change the constraint layout, which is what we're given by default, and make this into a relative layout. You can do everything you can do with the relative layout and a constraint layout, and in fact, constraint layout is a bit more modern, but just for simplicity for this walkthrough, I'm going to use relative layout. So I'm going to go back to the design tab, and then the project comes with hello world. We don't really care about that, so I'm going to delete that, and then drag the recycler view into my preview screen. So make sure the layout width and height are match parent. And one thing I just want to point out is that everything you're doing in this palette, which we're going to be using the palette primarily, is actually being reflected in the text tab. So because we dragged the recycler view component, you can now see it show up here. So this text tab is actually showing you the XML of the layout. The actual representation of the view is in XML. That's how Android is actually rendering views behind the scenes, but user-friendly way of modifying and positioning things. Okay, so why don't we give this recycler view an ID. I'm going to call it RV movies, RV standing for recycler view. And that was step one. So let's go back to movie activity. So we went ahead and added the RecyclerView support library. So we did that. The next step is define a model class to use as the data source. And actually, that's what we've already been doing. We have this movie.java class, right? And that is the model class. And we're populating a list of movie objects by doing this JSON parsing. So that's done as well. Add a recycler view to your activity to display the item. So that we just did, right? We just dragged and dropped the recycler view into our main XML, into our main view. So we've made really good progress. These next few steps are a bit longer, unfortunately, but we'll get through them. The next step is create a custom row layout XML file to visualize the item. So what we want to do here is create a new layout which will represent one row of the recycler view. And I should mention here that the reason the recycler view is called the recycler view is because it will do that efficiency optimization for you. So with these view holders, it'll actually recycle a view holder and bind new data to it as the user is scrolling. So all of that is taken care of for you with the recycler view. But the reason it's called recycler view is because it's recycling these views. So there's no need to actually create any more than is absolutely necessary. Okay, so this step is create a custom row layout XML. So to do that, we're going to go back to the resources folder, open up layout, and create a brand new layout. I'm going to call it item movie, and the root element will again be a relative layout. Okay, so what we want to create here is something that looks like the model assignment here. So you have an image, title, and an overview. So the image will be an image view, and then these two will both be text views, where the text is of differing sizes. Okay, so we're going to add image view here. And then Android Studio will ask you like what kind of sample data you want. And the purpose of this is only for the preview, right? So just so as you're building this app, you can kind of more easily visualize what it looks like. So we have image view. I'm going to actually go ahead and add an explicit width on this, maybe 120 dp. Cool. And then also give it an ID. I'll call it IV poster. Now I'm going to add a text view over here and give it an ID of the title. And it looks a little small, so I'm going to increase the size to be maybe 24. It looks a bit better. And then the difference between this text and this paintbrush text is that this paintbrush text is only for the purposes of showing it in the UI here. And we don't actually want the text to be text view. So we're going to get rid of it here, and we're going to put some sample text here, just for the purposes of showing something. So why don't we go over here and then copy a title from the actual response to see how it looks. So we have a star is born, and then we're going to have one more text view below it. Call this the TV overview. And again, why don't we put in some sample text. Cool. So that looks pretty good. And again, if you wanted to actually see how this translated into the XML, you can go into the text tab and you can see the modifications we made. So you can see like the 120 dp is layout width. Okay, so let's save that. One thing I like to do periodically, even though we don't expect to see any actual changes in the app, just go ahead and run it. So in the off chance that there is some mistake or some issue, then we'll catch that sooner. So again, we don't really expect any changes. We do see that we removed the hello world, so that's no longer there, but nothing that's showing up on the screen as we'd expect. But we did get this next step done. So create a custom row XML is now done with item movie.xml. The next step is create a RecyclerView adapter and view holder to render the item. So to do this, what we're going to do is go into the actual Java code, and I'm going to create a new package called adapters. And then you can imagine how in an app you might have many adapters for kind of different data types that are, and each adapter is responsible for binding the data and putting it into a view. So we're going to have an adapter here, and we're going to call it movies adapter. Great. So we have this new Java class, and the first thing I like to do when I create an adapter is define the view holder, right? So the adapter works on the basis of a view holder. So its job is to take this view, attach it to a view holder, and then put it on to the layout manager, right? And so we're going to create a view holder class, and this is going to extend. There's already a built-in view holder inside of RecyclerView. And so it's going to complain here there's no default constructor. So if you tap on the red light bulb, you'll get a default constructor here. This view holder is actually going to represent our item movie.xml. And so because item movie.xml has two text views and that image view, we can actually define those as variables in our view holder. I'm going to say text view TV title. So I'm going to do option enter to import that text view. And then similarly, we'll have a text view for TV overview, and then an image view. Again, I'll import that, and I'll say IV poster. Okay, so we're going to get references to these text views or image views using the IDs that we assigned. And so what we're going to do is say item view.find view by ID, and actually pass in the so we're going to import the resources which we have in our project. Go here, and I'll say import class. And so now we should get autocomplete. So I'll say r.id.tv title, and this will give us back a title text view. This is actually the member variable, so TV title. And then similarly, TV overview, item view.find view by ID, r.id.tv overview. And then finally, the same thing with the poster. Great. So now that we've defined this view holder, which is a representation of an individual row in our recycler view, we can actually reference this in our adapter. So now that we have that, you can go into the movies adapter, extend the default RecyclerView class, and this RecyclerView class is actually parameterized by the view holder. So I want you to reference the view holder that we've just defined. So make sure that you're referencing the one that we have in our project and not the kind of default recycler, not the default view holder, but the one that you've defined. Okay, so you'll see this red error bar, and that's because there are some abstract methods that are in the RecyclerView adapter that we need to implement. So click on the red light bulb, and then you should be able to implement all of these with a kind of a default implementation. And so here's kind of where we do the main work of how we're going to bind our data to show it onto the RecyclerView. In order to fill this out, I'm going to create a few different member variables. First is a context object, and the second is the actual list of movie. Okay, so once we have these two member variables, the way we're actually going to populate them is through the constructor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a constructor that actually takes in these two member variables. Cool. So now that we have these two objects, these two fields passed in from whoever is constructing the movies after, we can start using these to fill out the three methods that we have. The easiest one is get item count. This tells the RecyclerView how many items are in my data set. So this is pretty easy. All we're going to do is say movies.size. That's how many items we're going to have. OnCreateViewHolder is actually responsible for inflating this view that we created, item movie.xml, and we need to actually inflate it. And the way we do that is by saying layoutinflator.from, use the context, and then inflate the XML that we have, so item movie. And then there's two other parameters. What I did is I said Command P, and that gives me this prompt to show me the other parameters. So layout, the layout resource is item movie. The view group is the parent, which is passed in as a parameter. And then the last parameter is attached group, and I'm going to make that false. And false just because the RecyclerView will be what is responsible for attaching this to the view rather than the actual layout inflation. So the result of this is a view. So let's say view is equal to that. And then the return value is we're going to create a new view holder with that particular view. So we're going to call this constructor, and that'll be the return value of onCreateViewHolder. So we'll say return new viewholder view. Okay. So the next step is onBindViewHolder. So the idea here is we have a position in our data set, and you want to take that data that lives at that position and attach that data to a particular view holder that the RecyclerView has given to us, that the adapter has given to us. So the first step is let's actually pull out the data that lives at this position. That's easy because we already have an array list. So we're going to pull it out, the movies at get position. This is going to give us back a movie. And the next step is we want to actually bind the movie data into the view holder. So you could actually just do this directly in this method. You could basically say, holder.tvtitle.setText and kind of put whatever text you want here according to the data that we have. But I think a cleaner way, typically, the way I like to do it is actually define a method in the view holder which is responsible for setting the data. So what we're going to do is actually kind of invent the method that we want. So I'm going to say holder.bind and pass in the data that we have. So this bind method doesn't exist. So what you can do is click on that red light bulb and create that method bind in the view holder class that we have. And so that's convenient because it actually fills out a lot of this stuff for you. So it's a void data return type, which is fine. And it takes in a parameter called movie. And so the responsibility of this method is to actually put data inside of these different images. So this is actually not that difficult. All we need to do is say tvtitle.setText and use the getter methods that we defined on our movie class. So TV overview will be set the text to be the movie.getOverview. And then now we need to actually put the image, display the image inside of the image view. Unfortunately, Android doesn't have a default way to render remote images. So to do that, we're going to use a library called Glide. So go back to the course portal, and in the project setup bullet point, if you open up this guide about the Glide library, you can go here, and then you want to add these 2 lines, these 3 lines, I guess, into your build.gradle file. And so I'm going to go into here, and again, make sure you're adding it to the app module. So add these lines at the bottom, and click Sync Now. Cool. Now that that's done, we can actually start to use Glide. So I'll say glide dot with context, and then we want to load a URI, and the URI is the URL, the poster path URL that we have from our movie model. And the last part is we want to load it into a particular, we want to put it into a target, and the target will be the image view. Okay, so that was the implementation of the adapter. Again, let's just go ahead and run this. Notice that we're not actually ever using the movies adapter, so we don't actually expect to see any change in our app, but I like to periodically run the application just to make sure that nothing has broken. So we did successfully run the app, so now let's actually use the adapter in our main activity. Okay, so this next item is done because we just created an adapter and a view holder in that class. The next and final step is bind the adapter to the data source to populate the recycler view. So the way we're going to do that is first by pulling out a reference to the recycler view, which we added to our main layout. So the way we do that is kind of the standard API is find view by ID and then pass in the ID, which in our case is RV movies. And this is going to give us back a recycler view. I'll call it RV movies as well. Okay, the next step is we actually want to create an instance of the movies adapter that we just wrote. So I'll say movies adapter is equal to new movies adapter. And then remember how we added 2 parameters into the constructor. The first is context. The activity is actually an example of a context. So if I just say this, what we're referring to is the movie activity, so that works. And then the next parameter is movies. And so we're going to put in the list of movies that we have in line 25. The next step is we need to actually add a layout manager onto the recycler view so that the recycler view knows how to put these items on the screen. So I'll say set layout manager. And then there are some built-in layout managers that you can read about in the guide. So that's so you can see that there are some built-in layout managers like linear layout manager, grid layout manager, staggered grid layout manager. So for our purposes, we'll just use linear layout manager. And if I do Command P, it'll tell me the different parameters here. So context, which is this. Orientation, I'm going to make it vertical. And then reverse layout, I'm just going to pass in false here because we want it to be in the normal order. And then we need to actually set the adapter on the recycler view. So we set adapter and pass in the adapter that we just defined above. One important point here is that we have this variable called movies, which is what we passed into the movies adapter. You need to keep the reference to this movies alive. So one thing that we've done is we have movies here, but we haven't declared it. So we need to first, we want to just actually declare it as a new array list so we don't crash. Because at this point it'll be null, and now we're going to make it actually not null. So it'll be fine to pass in here. But one thing we need to do is we shouldn't change the reference of movies for the adapter. So if we change the reference, then the adapter will kind of forget what movie it's rendering, and they'll be out of sync. So instead of redeclaring it over here, you want to actually say add all. So what we're doing here is we're modifying the existing reference to movies rather than creating a new one. Okay, and the last step is you need to notify the adapter that the data that it's supposed to render has changed. So we're going to say movies adapter, or I guess we call it adapter, notify data set changed. And that should be it. So if I go ahead and run this, we should now finally be able to see some data. So you can see we actually do see some data, but interestingly, the data takes up the full screen height. And if you go back to your item movie, you'll see why. This is a relative layout, and the height is match parent. So you can kind of see the outline is the entire screen. So if we make this wrap content, you can see that it shrunk down to just being tall enough to fit all the content. So now if we run this again, you can see that it's a better looking UI. So this is kind of a very basic version of the application, at least from the UI perspective. One more thing I want to do, which I think will hopefully make the RecyclerView a bit more clear. I'm going to put some log statements inside of onCreateViewHolder and onBindViewHolder. So just for just for fun, I'm going to make the tag will be smile, and we'll say onCreateViewHolder here, and import the log statement. And then similarly down here, I'm going to say this is onBindViewHolder. And in addition to just printing out onBindViewHolder, I'm going to also print out the position where we are. So what we're looking for in these log statements is that, like I mentioned, one of the expensive operations in an Android app is doing view inflation. And so because I mentioned that recycler views are built with efficiency in mind, what we are looking for is that this onCreateViewHolder should only be called enough to have enough views on the screen. So you can imagine how you might have 1,000 views, 1,000 movies in your data set, but you don't want to create 1,000 view holders, right? You only want to create a handful, like maybe 4 or 5, that are actually being shown on your screen. However, as you scroll, these same 4 or 5 view holders will be bound with different data. So what we expect to see in our logs is that onBindViewHolder is called a bunch, while onCreateViewHolder is only called at the beginning when the app is really starting up. So let's go ahead and run the app and see if that actually is the case. So I'll open up Logcat. Let me clear the Logcat just to make it easier. And actually, let me run that again. I think I cleared it a bit too late. Okay, so right now, this is just the app started up. So you can see here that I'm filtering the logs by smile, so we can just get the things by our tag. And so you can see that we have onCreateViewHolder, onBindViewHolder, and the position is 1. And then you can see we're binding the first few elements here, which makes sense, right? Because we're kind of at the top of the list. So watch what happens as I scroll. So as I scroll, you can see, okay, now the number of times that we see the onCreateViewHolder in the logs has actually gone down quite a bit. So we actually don't even see it anymore at the bottom. But the position that we're binding is increasing. And that makes sense because I'm continuing to scroll down. So as I go down more and more, you can see that we're going all the way down to 19. And now that is actually all the data that we got so far. So if I scroll back up, we should be binding the earlier objects again. But notice again that we're not creating new view holders. We're simply binding the existing view holders with new data. So that's kind of the real power of the RecyclerView, is that it takes care of a lot of these efficiencies for you. So if you had trouble with this, what I'd recommend is read through this guide that we have. And also we have some really valuable hints in this section. So make sure that you're reading through this. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the assignment walkthrough. Hope you enjoyed it.